My name is John Polidor. I'm the Chief of Staff for Q Intel. I'm fairly confident that many of you in the room here today have not heard of Q Intel before. For those of you that do know us, it's a pleasure to see you again. For those of you that don't, Q Intel is a cyber threat intelligence company headquartered in Pittsburgh with offices around the globe to include a fully owned subsidiary in Ukraine. Comprised almost entirely of former intelligence community, federal law enforcement, and U.S. military professionals, Q Intel has tracked bad actors in cyberspace since 2009 and continues to work with industry and the federal government to hold e-criminals, terrorists, and adversarial nation-state advanced persistent threats accountable for their actions. At Q Intel, we recognize that we're at a tipping point in great power competition and that our maritime forces must evolve their capabilities in order to maintain the freedom of action that our nation requires. Older, legacy capabilities must be divested to allow for the investment in cutting-edge technologies. Now, as a retired Marine tanker with 15 years of experience in the Middle East, I can relate. I'm the living embodiment of a divested legacy capability myself. In all seriousness, we at Q Intel recognize and agree that this evolution must happen at the speed of relevance. We must be careful, however, not to become enamored with a new capability or technology without fully examining its vulnerabilities and how the threats of today and the threats of tomorrow can exploit them. Our mission at Q Intel is quite simple. We want to get ahead of these miscreants in cyberspace and help our nation's defenders defend themselves with the most updated and comprehensive understanding of the threats they face. This is why we're so very proud to sponsor this morning's panel, Defending Our Maritime Cyber Networks. The moderator for today's panel is Vice Admiral Matt Kohler. Admiral Kohler retired from the U.S. Navy in 2020 following 36 years of service. Kohler's final assignment was Director of Information Warfare, OpNav N2N6, Director of Naval Intelligence, and Deputy Director of Navy CIO. Other flag assignments include the First Commander of Naval Information Forces, Deputy Commander of Fleet Cyber Command 10th Fleet, Deputy Chief of NSA's Tailored Access Operations, and J2 of U.S. AFRICOM. Kohler now operates his own consulting business, supporting numerous clients such as Advanced Technology International, Deloitte, Rhombus Power, and Deepwater Point. Kohler is also a member of MITRE's Naval Board. Without further ado, Admiral.
Thank you, John. Hey, good morning, everyone. Come on, I know it's after breakfast. Hope you had some coffee. Good morning, everyone. Hey, it is really great to be here today. Thank you for being here today and helping us kick off what is day 2 of a very successful sea air space. So thanks for being here. I can see a fair amount out into the audience, and I see some familiar faces, mostly friendly. And stand edge, because I may, when I recognize you, call you for a question or two to keep your attention. But hey, I'd like to thank the Navy League and the CEO, Mike Stevens, an old friend and shipmate from our Navy time together, for organizing yet again what is by all measures a record-breaking sea air space. Spending time here yesterday with the panels and then down on the floor, just the energy and the buzz, clearly what's being organized here looks and feels right. And getting government and industry together here is so vital to what we're doing. So all of this, of course, doesn't happen by accident. All this work happens months before. Many hands apply to bring this event together, but there's one unsung hero I'd like to recognize from the Navy League is Julia Simpson. And I don't know if Julia is around here. She's probably running around. All the information you have in your apps, all these panels that come together, she is a superwoman. She does it like by herself. So if you see a name tag with Julia Simpson, stop her, thank her, because she brought this all together. Also, hey, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Q Intel, for bringing this together. The Q, by the way, stands for Q from James Bond, and they operate in God's country. Everybody knows where that is? Pennsylvania? Out of Pittsburgh. So thanks to our sponsors here. So it seems in the past couple of years there's been a fixation on crowd size. So looking at the audience, I think we have a pretty good crowd here today, even spread out in this large room. Certainly appreciate the turnout here, but humbly not surprised for two reasons. The topic of cyber I don't need to preach to this crowd how vital it is. Listening to the speakers across all the warfighting domains, from the Sea Service chiefs yesterday to the great panel we had this morning, it is understood to be vital and touches about every part of the business that we have. And so the theme, I would spin off the theme that the Navy League has for sea air space, which is the maritime century. And I would say we're looking at something, not overstating, it's the cyber century. And so, certainly not a surprise why we'd have so many people here. Another reason, the second reason why I think we have a turnout is because of the talent and the expertise we have on our panel here today. Truly impressive. And what I'd like to do with our choreography here today, I'd like to spend just a little bit of time introducing each one of them to you. Certainly you can look online for the bios, but I'd like to highlight them for you here so you understand the context of where they are. We have representations from each of the maritime services, from the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Marines, and just as importantly, we have a member from industry here, Steve from Microsoft. So I think we are ready to have a pretty expansive conversation about cyber, what it means to the maritime services. But really what I'd like to do is, as we generate discussion here in the panel, is look forward to your questions. So please think about your questions here, and we'll leave plenty of time for all of that. So allow me for introductions here. So I will go from your left to right here. Immediately to the left of me is Rear Admiral Stephen Donald, who is the Vice Commander, U.S. Fleet Cyber Command and the Reserve Deputy, 10th Fleet. He's been working at the cyber community for over 2 decades, both in and out of uniform, as an active duty officer, reservist, government civilian, defense industrial base contractor, and venture-based cybersecurity vendor. He brings a wealth of experience across a full spectrum of cyber operations, from a former interactive operator, an ION, which you were an ION before they were IONs, I think, and brings us a wealth of experience across the full spectrum of cyber operations. He was a founding chief of staff at U.S. Cybercom for Joint Task Force Ares, and since October of 2020, his unique perspective and expertise landed him at Fleet Cyber Command 10th Fleet as the full-time deputy overseeing the assured command control communications missions by securing, operating, and defending the Navy's networks. Steve is a superb example of the incredible talent that we get from our reserves that benefits across all of our maritime services. So, Steve, thank you, and look forward to your comments in our discussions today. Next is Rear Admiral Tracy Hines. She's currently serving as the Director of the Navy Cybersecurity Division on the OPNAV N2N6 staff. She's a native of Columbus, Ohio. That's almost in God's country. That's just a little further west, but it's pretty close. She is a deck plate leader, receiving her commission as the LDO program in '96 and then transitioned to information warfare in 2007. Received a master's degree in information technology, cyber forensics from Trident University in 2009. Rear Admiral Hines has served in numerous operational afloat assignments from the unit through fleet levels to include N6 on 7th Fleet staff, multiple afloat deployments to the Western Pacific and Arabian Gulf, and an individual augmentee deployment to Iraq. Rear Admiral Hines' shore assignments include 2 command tours at NCTS San Diego and Hopper Information Services in Suitland, Maryland. She was the Deputy EA to OPNAV N2N6 and the Executive Assistant to the Chief of Naval Operations. Rear Admiral Hines is nominated for assignment to go to U.S. Space Command, and it's a J3B.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So not only is Tracy a proven leader in the Navy, for those that have seen her in public events, she is a public relations rock star, and she likes to talk with her hands, so we'll give her free movement here today. Tracy, it's good to have you. Next is Rear Admiral John J. Vann, the U.S. Coast Guard Cyber Command. He is the commander of Cyber Command. He is responsible for conducting full-spectrum cyberspace operations in support of the Coast Guard, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of Defense mission objectives. Rear Admiral Vann doubles as the U.S. Coast Guard's Cyber Command Service Cyber Component Commander and is the service's sole authorizing official and cybersecurity service provider. He is a career operations afloat officer. He commanded 2 Coast Guard cutters and served aboard 5 others. His assignments include duty as Deputy Commander of Coast Guard Personnel Service Center, Assistant Superintendent of the Coast Guard Academy, and the Commanding Officer of the Coast Guard's largest training center. Jay is not only a great leader in the Coast Guard, his spouse is in the Coast Guard, and his daughter is a lieutenant in the Navy.
Sir.
I knew there was something I liked about you, Jay.
That's awesome.
Next is Mr. Russell Meade. He is currently serving as the Executive Director of the United States Marine Corps Forces Cyberspace Command, or MAR-4 Cyber. In that capacity, he's the principal advisor to the commander of MAR-4 Cyber on all matters of sensitive and complex cyberspace operations and for program, resource, and organizational management concerns. Prior to this assignment, Mr. Meade served as the Director of the Marine Corps Cryptologic Office from 2002 to 2021, a long time, Russ, where he served as the Senior Advisor to the Marine Corps Director of Intelligence for signals intelligence issues, and also as the Senior Marine Corps Intelligence Representative to the National Security Agency, where his efforts aligned well with the Force Design 2030 cyber requirements. Russ enjoys an enviable reputation inside the Marine Corps. I know Russ because I asked. That's tough to come by in the Marine Corps, but you've earned it, and it's great to have you on the panel today. Yes, sir. And finally, but not last but not least, is Steve Fail. Steve is the Microsoft Federal Security Business Leader and Security CTO for Microsoft, driving their efforts to help the United States government accelerate security modernization and realize the benefits of security transformation. His primary mission is to identify and evangelize the most valuable defensive cybersecurity tactics available to organizations today. He works closely with U.S. government clients. He partners internally with others and Microsoft security leaders and experts from every area of the company to align security engineering efforts to agency needs. Steve also looks toward the risks for tomorrow, an active security practitioner leading work on several incubation efforts and novel strategies to disrupt emerging cyber threats. We look forward to hearing about some of those here today, Steve, if you're willing to share. Steve is also a highly talented musician. He has a really cool collection of guitars. Anyone who does a virtual interaction with them will see them. And so we couldn't get him to show his talent here today, but maybe some other time we'll be able to hear you play.
Thanks, Matt. I'm not hiding any backstage, but next time maybe I'll bring a guitar. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So the choreography. What I'd like to do is allow each of our panel members to make some remarks, maybe frame more items that I missed about some of their experiences, but give their perspectives on what they see through their daily work. And then we'll follow it up by a question or two, and then we'll look to open up questions for the audience. So what I would like to do is then turn it over here. Steve, if you'd like to make some comments.
Sure, thank you. So good morning to everybody, and I want to thank both the Navy League and Q-Intel for sponsoring this panel and hosting us here. I'm really pleased to be representing the 20,000 sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines, civilians, and contractors that represent Fleet Cyber Command and United States 10th Fleet globally. 10th Fleet is the only global numbered fleet in the United States Navy. We have presences across the globe, and on any given day, the sun never sets on 10th Fleet. Our missions are sort of threefold. We must provide assured command, control, and communications to the fleet and the maritime forces. We also provide unique battle space awareness across the globe to all of our forces afloat, as well as the Joint Force. And then finally, we provide cyber effects to Joint Force commanders and maritime forces as necessary. Perhaps, and I'm a little biased because I'm the deputy that works the Assured C3 mission, but our most important mission is to ensure that our communications are rock solid and ready. And in the maritime domain, we have a couple of unique challenges, right? Certainly, ashore, we have the entire enterprise available to us, but we need to extend that enterprise for our maritime assets afloat, for all of our weapons platforms out there. They need to be almost mini data centers, mini network operation centers, and mini security centers out there. But they're mission platforms out there, and their primary mission is not to be IT and cybersecurity. Their primary mission is to deliver lethal effects, provide maritime domain awareness, and sea control when necessary. And so those items mean that cybersecurity, assured communications have to be woven into the fabric of everything that's built and produced by for our forces afloat. And so it's been a challenging experience because where you take an enterprise solution and you try to bring it afloat, you immediately run into a number of constraints, right? We work in a degraded, sometimes disconnected, intermittent and latent environment because most of our communications are hopefully fast-flowing satellite communications. But every once in a while, you gotta revert back to VHF, a line of sight, or HF. And your rates are just not as high as you would want them to be. And so you have to have an enterprise makeup that is able to extend out to the fleet in such a fashion that the work can be done. So I appreciate the time here, and I look to expand upon that insight through your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Awesome.
Tracy.
Well, good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank you all for being here today. Admiral Kohler, thank you, sir. I tell you, I was looking forward to some theme music. So Steve, now that I know you have some talent, we could have had some march-up music, but next time for certain. No, it truly is an honor to be here, and I really want to thank the Navy League for this opportunity as well. Last week, I attended the Combined Maritime Forces, the Combined Maritime Forces Combatant Commanders course in Southcom. And one of the things that was stressed there is just how important it is to make relationships. The key thing that we talked about with our partners was making relationships. And I tell you, there were representatives there from Brazil, Argentina, Suriname, Guyana, Spain, the Netherlands. We had the UK, and on and on and on. There were just so many. And so we definitely got to talk about some of our maritime challenges. But one of the main things that we focused on was just some things like trafficking and drug smuggling, and also with respect to the illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing issues. So a lot of my eyes were opened up to, wow, that's a challenge within itself. And then when I start talking about cyber and defending our cyber networks and what challenges are you having, we didn't have a lot of conversation. There's still a lot of things that, we don't want to discuss this. We don't want to say that out loud. But of course, I kept poking and poking. In fact, we had the Peruvian CNO there. And he said, well, I have a cyber defense force. And I got really excited. I started talking about what about from the offensive side and the defensive side. And it was like, well, it hasn't quite matured yet, but we know we got some work to do. And I tell you, defending our cyber networks and the cyber challenges, it really isn't anything new. We've always had a security aspect to our networks. And I'm talking from the way back when all we had was HF communications, that HF ship shore. Yes, we still had an encryption, decryption. There was something that we used to make sure we kept things secure. So now, as technology has, made things a lot more complicated, it's still a challenge that we need to be ready for. So when I think about defending and protecting our networks, there's an aspect to it. There's a protect, there's a detect, there's a defend, and then there's also a resolve part to when it comes to our networks. I think where we are challenged the most, and many of you have heard me say this before, is that detect piece. Because too often, we are putting the fire out. You know, the event has already happened, and there we are putting it out. So we do our patches, we say, hey, we're gonna make things more robust, more rigorous, and onward we row. But what I'd like to do is spend more time on that deep tech part, where we can be more proactive than reactive, looking at those precursor behaviors and anomalies so that we can sniff out the badness before it even starts to happen. I think that is where, and I know there's a lot of tools out there, and I've already talked to some of our industry partners to really help us out in that area. So I want to be left of boom. I want to be there before the fight gets to us, and I think there's a lot of opportunity. In my job, of course, as the OpNav N2 and 6 Director of Enterprise Network and Cybersecurity, I am responsible for making sure we get the resources and requirements piece right. So I have to, one, know what is out there that we can leverage, what capabilities, what tools, and I also have to make sure I stay plugged into the warfighter. I think Steve and I must at least correspond at least once a week. Got to stay tapped into, what's going on out there. What do we really need so we can get it right? Because as we know, the non-kinetic fight is already here. We're already behind the power curve. And I like to say, hey, if you're always ready, you don't have to get ready. So we need to make sure the warfighter is ready, and then we get the most robust tools and things from that proactive standpoint so that we can always be ready. So having said all of that, I look forward to your questions. And again, I'm really honored to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Jay.
So I have to follow the rock star. So Admiral, thanks for being up here to moderate, and to my fellow panel mates, thanks to the Navy League and Q Intel for bringing us together. Just a little bit more about myself and then a little bit about Coast Guard Cyber. I am born and raised in Connecticut. So today is a good day if you are a Connecticut Huskies fan. And yes, I stayed up last night to watch the entire game. But a little bit about me. You heard in my bio, a little different than my colleagues up here who have some deep experience in the field here. And Admiral Fagan assured me when she assigned me these duties that she did it for a reason. And that reason was the background that I bring to this fight is the perspective of an operator. As you heard, I've spent a fair amount of my career at sea. And kind of looking at things from that angle of operations. And then the balance of my career has been spent in HR and training. And as I'm sure my colleagues up here are going through in their services and their organizations, our workforce right now is a significant focus for us to bring it to the place where it's prepared to take on today's and tomorrow's threats. And so we have a number of initiatives that I may get into a little bit later that are expanding and deepening the base of expertise in the Coast Guard that will prepare us to do our mission. So I have a smart, experienced team that works for me with background in this field. But again, that operator's perspective and that HR background is why I'm here. And those are really the areas of focus for me in my tenure at Coast Guard Cyber is establishing our operational tempo after my predecessors have built a great unit that we'll get into again and talk about a little bit more as we go through the panel, and then growing and forming the workforce that we're going to need going into the future. So a little bit about Coast Guard Cyber. We too have 3 lines of effort, but we're a little bit unique. As many of you know, we live in a few different camps, being an agency within the Department of Homeland Security, but being a member of the Armed Forces and a member of the Joint Force. Our 3 lines of effort, 2 of them will sound familiar and 1 makes us a little bit different. That first line of effort is to operate and defend our networks and our systems. That's the same as the other cyber component commands. We are on the Defense Information Network, the DoDIN, so we have our piece of all the systems that we need to protect. And again, so the teams and people we're developing, the tools we have, the processes, we really report to Joint Force Headquarters DoDIN and have a role, one of the slices, if you will, of operating and defending our networks on the DoDIN. Our second line of effort is really the line of effort that makes us unique. As the agency that regulates the marine transportation system, much of the maritime industry, we have a role in protecting that maritime transportation system in cyberspace. I'll throw a few quick numbers out, but Over 90% of goods in this country at some point travel by water through 360 plus ports in this country, 95,000 miles of coastline and 25,000 miles of inland waterways on which our economy really is generated with that over 90%. That is almost a $5 trillion endeavor every year. And as you can imagine, all of the types of organizations that operate in ports and on the water and adjacent to ports, there is a significant cyber threat surface there that needs to be considered. And it is spread far and wide from public, government, local, municipal, private, commercial, you name it, small to large organizations. And the Coast Guard has a role in ensuring that all of the partners that operate within that marine transportation system are secure from cyber threats. And then our third line of effort, again, similar to our fellow services, is to operate in and through cyberspace to deliver cyber effects. And we do that in partnership with the other members of the Cyber Mission Force through U.S. Cyber Command. So I look forward to getting into the conversation and answering your questions. Thanks for having the Coast Guard here today.
Thanks, Jay. Russ.
Admiral, thanks for having us, and thanks to the hosts, the Navy League, and to all of you for braving the parking out there. It was like FedEx Field after the Rolling Stone concert. It was so you must want to hear what the partners have to say. And I actually have a lot of things to say that are similar to the Coast Guard in the sense that we too are small, but we're glad you're here because we don't look quite as small in terms of our numbers. Talk about a couple things. One, MARFOR Cyber. Our role, we actually have three roles. We're MARFOR Cyber, MARFOR Space, and as of January, the Marine Corps Information Command, which is a new construct for us operationalizing and looking to weaponize information. MARFOR Space Hat obviously is kind of explanatory, but in the cyber realm, I come from also a background of intel, as you saw. Active duty time as a Signet EW officer, and then time in cyber. I've been here about 20 months, and sandwiched in between were 2+ decades of intelligence, where I was always a beneficiary of networks that were relatively short as far as I could tell, and collection efforts of others. And I'll say that as we get more into similar to the Coast Guard, in a world where we are delivering effects and defending the networks, we go beyond running networks. The Marine Corps Enterprise Network, we actually consider fighting the network, fighting the installation, recognizing the scope and scale of the challenge that we're facing today and what it's going to take to answer that. Something else you touched on that is huge to the Marine Corps' talent management, both the Marine Corps writ large and also in the cyber field. When you are as small as we are, the talent is incredibly important, especially when you're operating in those disparate locations, those degraded networks potentially down the road. Our command, again, we have an offensive and a defensive mission, but our number one command priority for the commander is Assured C2. Because when you start looking at some of the great strides we made in Force Design 2030, all of it is predicated on having Assured C2. We talk about being an inside sensing force for the stand-in force for the larger joint force. If we can't talk and communicate and move data, as we're out there collecting data, that'll be critical for closing other people's kill chains. If we can't do that, then we're dead in the water. We become a liability, not an asset. So everything we do is geared towards Assured C2 as our top priority. Our defensive teams, I will tell you, are our most deployed, and that is intentional. Our general made that his driving force early on, is that because we recognize the need, and I will tell you, coming from the intel background, I didn't recognize how proactive it takes you to be very effective at cyber defense. In my old job in the intel world, I kind of looked at it more as, you kept yourself patched and up to date, which is important, but if you just do that, you're kind of creating a cyber Maginot Line, right? A digital Maginot Line. You think you're safe, but there's something you don't know about behind you. You have to hunt and be proactive. We've seen that on a large scale with Cybercom. We're seeing it, I think, with our services as well, proactively hunting, making sure that people are assured. We start looking at zero trust and where we're headed towards, making sure that you earn the bona fides to be in the network all the time. That's something that's critical for us because we recognize that network will be the lifeblood of everything from contested logistics to actually closing the kill chains to being an inside sensing force. That's definitely something that is critical to us, especially as, again, force design, Marine Littoral Regiments, that we start finding ourselves inside the weapons engagement zone against a very capable series of adversaries. And I'll tell you again, it's been a really impressive thing to see. We talk about our building over at MARFOR Cyber headquarters as a warfighting platform, because it really is, offensively and defensively. So again, share many things in common with my maritime partners here and the things that they're experiencing, the talent management, the challenges, but also looking again at the incredible things the young people today are doing in defense of our networks. But it's also a larger partnership with industry. It's a digital ecosystem. We need to defend terrain. We need that terrain to be as defensible as possible. So working with you early on is hugely helpful to us. I will tell you, I'm a little bit spoiled in the sense that we have a number of Marine General Officers at Cyber Command right now, one of them being General Lorna Maylock, who is the Cybersecurity Directorate's military lead. And she and I talk regularly about how we can work with industry and the DIB to make you more defensible so we can work together and start off from ground that's more defensible from day one. So look forward to the conversation, look forward to the opportunities, and thank you for hosting us.
Thank you, Russ. Steve.
Good morning. I want to thank the Navy League for setting up this conference, for inviting us, having this panel. I want to thank everyone in the audience for attending, but mostly for prioritizing cyber. And so as Tracy talked about earlier, we appreciate that awareness that cyber is receiving as a warfighting domain and as a horizontal that stretches across all domains. And so in my role as security leader and security CTO for Microsoft Federal, I'm privileged to lead a number of cyber defenders across many of our teams, looking after the civilian, defense, as well as intel businesses. And Microsoft's commitment is to you. We've made commitments to the US government, we've made commitments to the DoD, we've made commitments across the board to help you realize your cyber objectives and outcomes. And so that is truly the basis of our partnership, is we look forward and say, where are you going? Where are you headed? How can we enable that? I guess it was more than a year ago. I guess time moves quickly. When EO 14028 came out, I think one of the most impressive things for me was just that mission of the US government is going to lead in cyber by example. And that was really an exciting thing for industry to look on and say, yes, that leadership in the world, that leadership for the private sector coming from the US government. If the US government can do it, we can all do it. And those lessons learned are going to be incredibly valuable along the way. So it's really been a sprint since then. I started off, I'll give you a little bit of my background, started off as a developer. I worked with nonprofits, had a couple of startups, went from there and supported the Army for a little while. I don't know if at Sea, Air, and Space, Army is a four-letter word, but I'm going to go ahead and use it anyway. And it opened my eyes to the challenges that are faced within these domains and the absolute need. So I've spent more than 20 years working on cybersecurity, and the challenges that were faced there were at a scale and at a depth that I had not encountered before. So I experienced both on the offensive side as well as the defensive side of cyber. I made my way to Microsoft, been there for 9 years now, and have been privileged to see Microsoft grow up as a security company. We always had a little bit of secret sauce security that we did with the US government, but to see the whole company now embrace it as a strategic priority worldwide is really exciting. And so shortly after EO 14028, our CEO, Satya Nadella, made a commitment to President Biden at the White House that we were going to invest $20 billion over the next 5 years into cybersecurity. That doesn't count acquisitions, that doesn't count a lot of things that we're investing, but we have more than 8,500 cybersecurity professionals at Microsoft today. We're privileged to have more than 300 of them sit within the federal org. So as Microsoft Federal looks at how can we better support DoD, we're looking at your missions of how do you man, train, equip. It's more than just technology acquisitions. How do we support those CPTs that are on the ground in the battle every day? So those are the questions that we're asking. Forums like this are a great opportunity to hear about what we can do more. I imagine the panelists are going to throw a number of questions towards me to that effect. And just know that Microsoft is supporting you, is leaning in to help you achieve your security outcomes. And one other thing I'll say is the federal org is a bit unique. We actually sit within an engineering org called Strategic Missions and Technologies. And those strategic missions and technologies are in a number of adjacent areas that affect you as well. So everything from quantum computing to 5G, orbital. We're thinking about security holistically across those platforms. So I'm privileged to work on post-quantum cryptography one day and how do you secure a ground station the next day. We know that all of those things are intrinsic to those Horizon 2, Horizon 3 security concerns of the US government. I sit at the intersection of policy and what happens on the ground when there's a bad day. So privileged to have those perspectives and looking forward to speaking with the distinguished panelists today.
Thank you, Steve. So I think you can see the breadth of experience and talent here on this panel. We have people sitting in operational positions. We have expertise on the resourcing policy side, the people side, across all of the maritime domains, and then we have a perspective from an industry standpoint. Every one of them just brought up some great points. Steve, you're right, things are moving quickly. I left that fight almost 3 years ago, and it's amazing how much progress continues even in that short time frame. So I will just open up with a question here. So each of the services have made really great strides on their enterprise architectures and capabilities in terms of operating resiliency and a defensibility standpoint. So I'd ask for your comments on where you thought you've made great gains and where there still needs to be improvement, and then where industry needs to help in that regard. I'd also make that a two-part question because they are related. This is a maritime cyber panel, and so each of the maritime services have their unique challenges from an afloat expeditionary standpoint that bring very different kind of challenges that are separate from the enterprise networks. And we rely on industry to help us with those solutions. And so I would ask just, if you can, offer just some perspectives on your enterprise services, where you think they're going, and then where your challenges remain. I think great power competition that we're in underscores the need for what is provided here in these expeditionary to float environments. So Steve, would you like to offer something?
Yeah, so I'd like to kick off, right, with the U.S. Navy's flank speed effort, right? It's sort of because of COVID and because of sort of a change in how we were architecting our contractual obligations with our Navy Marine Corps Internet, it became sort of a genesis event for modernizing our networks. And it started off with the right talent and the right technology coming together with the right partnerships. With a systems command, PEO Digital, who was very eager to work with us, with a resource sponsor from N2, N6, and even Department of the Navy CIO, right? This was the Navy's modernized cloud-based office architecture, utilizing a zero trust mentality from the get-go. And we still maintain that zero trust mentality across the board. And working with Microsoft and all the folks there, we have iterated over time, and we have adopted more and more of the technologies. We've adopted more of the practices, and I think one of the biggest challenges that I see, at least on the enterprise side, is how do I get all the right tools into the right talent, because there's so much capability there that I think that we need to leverage more to get more out of. But I need the talent to understand it, to execute that there. When we go to the afloat side, I love the cloud, right? But I don't have access to the cloud all the time while I'm afloat. So I need industry to figure out how to give me a virtual cloud, if you will, while afloat, so that while I'm disconnected, I still have all the capabilities I can possibly have locally. And then when I reconnect, it is seamless, right? I don't have two different identities. I don't have an afloat identity and a shore identity. I have one identity that just seamlessly transfers as I go out, that sort of moderates itself as bandwidth limitations or other network issues occur, and then is as survivable as it can be, because our warfighting platforms are going to go into contested areas where one, I may turn everything off just so that no one can see our emanations, or two, I've got to be able to fight through, adversaries jamming, adversary deception, whatever the case may be. So, from my perspective, I think those are the major challenges, but I'm sure Tracy has some additional.
No, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that, because, as I look back and I think about when flank speed was moving down the tracks, we kind of got forced into using these tools. COVID, it actually highlighted many challenges that we had. A lot of people went home, a lot of people had to work, but we still wanted to be able to collaborate. Well, what we found out is you know, the bandwidth demands when everybody's at home working, trying to reach onto the network, our NMCI network, it was not easy. So we learned a lesson. We said, okay, well, let's at least increase the bandwidth. We started, like we said, we implemented flank speed. We really took advantage of the Teams environment. I remember when we were on CVR and everyone was like, oh no, you can't get rid of CVR. I was like, hey, we got one better. So just hold on to that to allow us to still be able to collaborate and communicate. So definitely changed our mindset. It was like a paradigm shift on how we actually do business, which was a little bit exciting. So it's like, okay, now what's next? Yeah, cloud, here we come, right? But we still got, like I said, some of those infrastructure challenges that we just need to have more robustness and more resiliency in that area. And I know there's a lot of people that are working on that. And oh, by the way, we also got to make sure we keep things protected. So as Steve mentioned, yes, when you're out there in the fight, and I tell you, being in the 7th Fleet AO, we had a whole lot of bandwidth, a whole lot of capacity on board the Blue Ridge. So when we were up, it was awesome. But when we were not, it was not awesome. And when we came back up and things were missing, that was a bad day. So as Steve alluded to, yeah, in that DDL type of environment, we need to still be able to, you know, pop back up and still have our information and be ready to keep rolling down the tracks. I keep getting asked the question, well, when is flank speed going to the ships? When are the ships going to get flank speed? And I know there are many that are working on that. And I think the big challenge is when you're in that deny, degrade, intermittent, and latent environment, you know, how do we overcome that so that when you do come back online, you can still have what you need and keep moving and rolling through. And I know, like I said, we've made a lot of strides in that area, but we still have some challenges to go. But this is just exciting because it is a step. You know, like I said, you know, where we were before we were forced to have to use some of these tools, and now we're just hungry for more. You know, what else do we have? And I know, you know, Microsoft definitely has been really helpful with us in some of the tools that are available so that we can continue to, you know, be able to collaborate securely. So that's all I have.
Great following the Navy because some similar themes. I guess what I would offer on top of that is maybe similar to Marine Corps units. We are often small and lean, and make no mistake, we're a global Coast Guard. We have units operating at both poles in the far reaches of the Westpac and the Indo-PACOM AOR in Europe and Africa right now today, and all around the country, small kind of lean units, if you will, who require, and I'm glad Tracy told me that the last time she saw Admiral Fagan, the Commandant told her bandwidth. So common theme, but our ability out there at the front edge with lean units to be able to carry on all that critical work and tie back through systems that we have the bandwidth and that are protected. And then I would say in the space where we work with industry and the ports, it's working towards standards that everybody can have that are consistent. We have that regulatory role. So in addition to just enterprise services, there's that discussion about our interactions with that part of the public and commercial space, and having consistency across systems that we end up regulating. So to take it into the Coast Guard port security realm as well, but very similar themes.
So the great thing about following up the Navy is that because we're a naval expeditionary force in readiness, a lot of our world is on a ship. And then when we go ashore, we have that kind of second personality, lean and small, as you allude to. And we mentioned earlier, it's not about running a network, it's about fighting a network. And part of it is resiliency and reconstitution, because as you fight, you're going to take hits. How do you reconstitute once you've gone down? Help with things like that as you have small segmented networks when necessary that you can bring up at the time. The cloud, hugely helpful to that. And again, I mentioned in the zero trust of making you earn the bona fides to join and not just assume. We're going to be inside the weapons engagement zone, and we're already there today. We're about to kick off a large exercise, Balakatan, having thousands of Marines. And as you do more experimentation, you see again just the value of command and control in every facet of what we do. Something I didn't touch on earlier, but I probably should have, is partnerships, right? That is the lifeblood and the strategic asset for the U.S. As a nation and as a maritime nation. We have a lot of partners that we're engaged with as well. So how you engage with them, how you interact with them, how you share with them, and have one common when necessary engagement network. It is very much a talent-based business, like we said, because you have to understand the latest technology. You have some fantastic technology that we're employing in the private sector as we bring it on, but it is a challenge to recruit. It's a challenge to retain, but it pays huge dividends when we get the right things going. Our McCog, our people who defend our networks out of Quantico, we have a watch floor up at Laswell Hall as well. It's a 24-hour a day, it's an away game all the time and a home game too. It's never ending. So all the tools are extremely helpful. Like I said, though, it is a digital ecosystem where I'll just kind of reinforce my earlier point. We need people to help us to make it the most defensible terrain up front so that we're not bolting on solutions in the back end. So look forward to working with you. And again, I'll foot stomp for some of the NSA Cybersecurity Directorate free services that they offer to help with you a little better understanding of your own threat surface, attack surface, and also threat intel sharing. That's been a huge thing for us. Again, I worked more offensively when I looked at intelligence, both in collecting and in the offensive side of things, and the cyber side. But threat intelligence and sharing it at the right time is critical. And I think certainly the command has made major strides in that, and it's really paying big dividends for us.
Great points all. Steve, any perspective you can shed from an industry standpoint? You're hearing the demand signal of deployed afloat forces, and I know it's something we're engaging across industry. Can you offer a perspective on that?
I hear the demand signal loud and clear. I think pressing into innovation for DDIL environments, pressing into innovation for network contextual awareness. If we think about threat intelligence, if we think about the appropriate response, remediation action to take, environments matter. And we shouldn't take those environments for granted. So from a zero trust perspective, if we're taking adversary capability into account, we have an assume breach posture. We should also have a posture of assuming non-connectivity. And so do we fall back gracefully in those scenarios? And what are core components and elements of zero trust that we can operate afloat? Do we know what those are, and have we achieved the readiness such that we're able to man that capability? Those are all areas that we're thinking on, and as we think through those, it makes us more resilient even in the cloud. Those lessons learned are portable. Those lessons learned apply to sovereign clouds. Those lessons learned apply everywhere. So definitely see that prescriptive guidance and clarity and measurable improvements in security is really that next step of what's needed. So as a part of the work that Microsoft and other CSPs are doing with DoD CIO's Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office, that testable security, there are a number of activities. There's a red team assessment. Can you validate that the appropriate things have been done for this environment? As we look at possible future phases of what that looks like, things like BYOD, things like DDIL environments, all of that is going to make the core enterprise solution better. So enterprise is the most well-known space. Let's validate and measure those approaches in the enterprise. And then let's look beyond it. And I truly believe that that demand signal is going to drive more innovation that will make the cloud as well as disconnected networks stronger.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. We have just a little less than 15 minutes left in our session here, so I'll respond to folks moving up to the microphone here for any questions that you have. So we'll continue our dialogues up here, but please line up for. So thank you for your question in advance. For the choreography, I would like them to be framed in a question, and please identify who you are, who you're affiliated with. And then frame your question. And this isn't like Rodney Dangerfield Back to School where you get one question in 26 parts. So
I left my volumes of my speech at home. It's okay.
Great.
Sydney Friedberg, BreakingDefense.com. Several of you mentioned the cloud, DIL challenges. We hear a lot about AI for everything from cybersecurity to generative AI, and so much of that runs off the cloud or requires a huge amount of compute that people have to connect to remotely. How do you institute AI on your afloat or small lean forward units without ripping out a ton of legacy compute, without putting a satellite hanging over every ship to give you the bandwidth you need for that kind of very hungry application?
Thank you, Sydney, for your question. I'll leave it up who wants to take that. There's multiple pieces in that. It sounds like how are we lining up cloud with AI, with maybe some type of data approach to the problem set.
Right. So the hardest thing is moving data around, especially in a disconnected environment or a DDIL environment. So the strategy is what models can work with the less amount of data, if you will, that I might have out forward. But then I have a reach back capability because a query and a response are relatively low bandwidth or low data requirements. So if I have just that low data piece, I could probably get some semblance of an answer that maybe a smaller portion of an AI that has my local data can then meld together. I think that's probably the near-term vision of what I'd call AI afloat, until I get better compute or faster compute or more. Certainly there is an initiative to put a cloud on some of our large decks, writ large out of sea. So the carriers and the carrier amphibs out there. But I still going to have the constraints when I'm disconnected. So I think you have to have a strategy where and I don't know where the technology is in that smaller form, disconnected form of AI. But if industry has good ideas there, I think that's the model you want to play after.
Yeah, and I'll just pile on a little bit. We're really excited about artificial intelligence. I think that it's just going to improve our overall efficiency and effectiveness. There's just going to be, we're just going to be a smarter way in which we operate, I think. I had an opportunity to visit the 5G warehouse when I was at AFCEA, and I was like, well, this is awesome. Little robots doing some things. That's definitely going to help us out. Then when you think about it, as the question was asked, well, how do you apply this, and what is going to be needed for float? It's like, yeah, we're going to need a lot of bandwidth. I know that, and we know we are resource constrained in that arena, but I think it can be done. As Steve mentioned, having the proper reach back capabilities ashore, I think will help us out. But yeah, we're really excited about artificial intelligence, and that's another one of those paradigm shifts that we're just going to have to, watch it mature and be available to take advantage of it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Catherine Carter. I'm from Tritus, and we do data encryption on commercial devices at all levels of classification. So my question is what role does data encryption on commercial devices play in your defensive strategy and needs, especially considering that there's more of a push for more of the processing to be done as close as possible to the technical edge? So what are your needs to ensure that the data is protected both at rest and in transit?
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Any takers?
So absolutely need data encryption, and if I could have it at rest and in transit all the way, from point A to point B, and be fast, that would be, probably the ideal, right? Certainly, there are requirements to have, different levels of encryption across the classification. We certainly have that, and modern encryption has to be quantum encryption resistant or proof, right? It's one of those factors that I think has to be baked in every requirement, right? I view cybersecurity as a foundational requirement in any warfighting platform from here on out, right? I don't have to necessarily have a separate CLIN. I don't have to have a separate, call out per se. It just has to be baked in from the start. And certainly, encryption has to be part of that. Can I get it fast enough? Can I get it restored quickly enough? Can I get it decrypted and encrypted appropriately? Those are the things that I would be looking for from end to end. Now, I don't buy such things, right? We're the operators, so it needs to be easily to operate. But through the resource sponsor, we put out the operational need, and then our syscoms go out and actually, procure those items.
Yeah, and there's an authority to operate piece. I think everybody's familiar with the RMF process. We really are looking at automating that process so that we have a continuous continuously monitored process. So where you can get an ATO, and just as long as you do these certain things to keep that current, you can maintain that ATO. So that'll help with that side of the acquisition process to making sure that we can get those products.
Well, I think it goes even deeper than that, right? Right. You're building the ATO as the development of the system is being built, right?
Yeah.
At the various milestones, at the checkpoints. It's not just does it work, it's
Right.
does it work and is it secure?
Keep checking, yep, continuously. No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Don Yeski, Chief Technology Officer, Department of Navy. It's clear from the remarks the panel's already given that we've made a lot of hay with Microsoft as we've gone through flank speed and on the Marine Corps Enterprise Network. My question is really, though, for Microsoft. We live in a multi-vendor, multi-cloud world now. We do a lot of work with AWS. We are starting to do a lot of work with our other JWCC awardees. And our own platforms are not necessarily Microsoft. So, as we think about a float, like Red Hat OpenShift is a key driver for Canes. So can you talk to us a bit about how we shift from the hay that we've made in a Microsoft's pure sense to more of a multi-cloud, multi-vendor world?
Sure, happy to take that one, Don. Thanks for the question. So Microsoft as a security company, we represent much more than productivity, much more than just a CSP, but we do operate as one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the world. As such, it's imperative that we enable you to protect everything. So as we look at commitments around multi-cloud security, as we look at multi-platform security for things like Defender for Endpoint, those are table stakes for us and absolutely an active area of investment. So we hire cybersecurity analysts with expertise in AWS, in GCP. We have capabilities with our Defender for Cloud to help secure and monitor those environments as well. And so that is an area where customers are asking us, like Navy, to say, make it simpler. If we're going to utilize your cybersecurity capabilities, your cloud capabilities, I can't defend 3 clouds separately. I can't defend 6 clouds separately. If I have as many clouds as I have on-premises networks, how in the world would I defend them? So as we look at that, creating continuity and that common operational picture is absolutely essential. The next layer of that is, how do I translate those things? Because identity in an Azure ecosystem is going to be different than identity in an AWS ecosystem. And that's where having true hybrid identity, that is the same identity that you have in the cloud, as on premises, as afloat, as in a third-party cloud, is really the North Star for Microsoft, so you can have continuity of signal. As we also look at AI advancements, we have Security Copilot that we just recently announced as well, which is a large language model for cybersecurity. Not only does it help with readiness and equipping cyber operators, but it can also be used to translate information from various systems. And so if a particular security construct or control looks one way in one cloud and another way in another cloud, Security Copilot can be trained on all of that and make it appear seamless for the operator. So that's really the North Star of where we're headed, is not only do we want to protect other clouds, but we want to rationalize your security posture across multiple clouds. And we are incorporating that into our Zero Trust work as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you for taking my question. Sean Ray with Nozomi Networks. My question is towards the convergence of OT and IT. We have a gap between N4 and N6 to try to get the data to be collected so that we can get it to our cyber operators so that they can see the underlying pieces that are holding up our resilient data sets. Could you comment on how you see the convergence moving forward within Navy?
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. I will tell you, we are certainly in 2 and 6 engaged with N4. In fact, there's several working groups that are getting after a lot of our different challenges, because as I mentioned, infrastructure, there's an N4, there's a scenic, ownership to that, especially as we start to build out things, but also there's also, of course, a communications piece to that as well. You know, a piece from an IT standpoint that we need to make sure that we, you know, get off the ground and actually are able to articulate, hey, here's some of the things we need to be thinking about. So we are aligned, we are communicating. If I'm understanding your question, so like I said, through several working groups. So it's not a, hey, you build it and then you come along. No, we're joined as we start to think about, you know, new capabilities and, you know, what we're trying to build out, and then what are some of the communications or information telecommunication aspects to that as well. Not as an afterthought, but I think we are more aligned.
I think there would be a great industry ask, right, because OT and IT cybersecurity are similar but different, and that difference is significant. And so, do I train two different folks, or can I have a technology or industry solution that brings the two together in sort of a converged path? So I have a single operator, single pane that is both, you know, worried about my HM&E and plant operations as well as my IT system. So that's a solution I think that we're all looking for. Thank you.
That's good.
Okay, I know we have slightly more questions than we have time, so, but I think we're about ready to get the hook off the stage. I would like to thank again the Navy League and for our sponsor here for the panel, Q-Intel, and thank you for the panel members. Your time is precious and under pressure, so thank you for your time here today. Thank you for sharing your insights, and hope that the exchange has been beneficial with our industry partners, our international partners that we have here, as well as others within our maritime services. Thank you all, and thanks again to the panel members.